Well, good evening. This is a special event where we get to talk about the incredible progress we're making in global health and some of the really innovative things that have happened. And so let me say how thankful I am to Unitaid for pulling this event together. Also, I understand our host is CESE, who gathers people together to talk about important public policy issues, and I'm pleased they agreed to get us all together as well. Talking about how we help poor countries and how we use innovation to do it is definitely one of my favorite topics, so I was very pleased that it worked for me to be here today. Today I had a chance to meet with the President of France and thank him for the leadership that the country has shown over the years in terms of these global health issues. Whether it's creating Unitaid that we'll get into, supporting a global fund, trying to think about new ways of raising money for these issues, even in a time where money is very tight. France has been in a leadership position, and I think the President coming to the reception a bit tonight is a good indication of the continuation of that huge commitment. I do have a few slides. I like to use slides. This second slide here is my favorite slide. And you heard about this earlier, but I think it's something that bears discussion. Now, many people who, when they hear about all the needs that are unmet in poor countries, don't have the historical perspective of how much progress we're making. I think even people who are very committed to our cause may not realize that we're building on a lot of really amazing successes. And so one of the most important figures is this under 5 mortality. As was discussed, it's come down from about 50 years ago from 20 million. Now the latest data, which is for 2012, is 6.6 million. And that's from about 20% down to about 5%. Now, with the right kind of innovation, the right type of resources, we can see a path over the next little over 20 years to bring that down to about 2%. And so when we think of it, this is big. You know, if you think about it in terms of millions of lives per year, you know, any day that an airline crashes or nowadays disappears, I guess, you know, that's an absolutely gigantic thing. But when you're saving several million lives a year, it's like that happening, you know, every single day. That's happening again and again. And yet, the heralding the progress we've made in that, it's not clear when there's a headline. You know, when is that reported? If there's a setback, that's news. But good news, unlike bad news, tends to happen in a very gradual fashion. And, you know, so this basic picture of where we're going with childhood health, I don't think is widely known. Now, buried in these numbers are some incredible efforts. The smallpox eradication effort, which was during the 1970s, you know, that was almost 2 million lives a year that are coming down because of that. The measles vaccine was mentioned. That's another incredible reduction. In the 1980s, UNICEF, under the leadership of Jim Grant, decided to go out and get all the children of the world vaccinated. He set a goal of 80%, and so from the start of that decade, when the number was around 20%, to the end of the decade, they got up to that 80% number. Now, we shouldn't be satisfied with 80%, but it was really a miracle. It was done at a time when technology to track data and to see what was going on was far more primitive. But simply by pointing out to countries where they were falling behind, he made things happen. So we can be very optimistic about what's happened. We can say to the cynics who are saying things don't change that no matter how you look at it, if you look at the large numbers, if you have a chance to go and see hospitals that would have had children, would have been full of children dying of malaria or diarrhea or respiratory diseases in the past, now they aren't nearly as full, and we still owe it to every kid that is in there to help them out. My involvement in global health started in the late 1990s. My wife and I decided to start our philanthropy, and our first area we worked on was availability of contraception. That's still something we're very committed to. There's a lot of great work that needs to be done. But we weren't quite sure what to think about health issues because this issue of if we improved health, would that increase population, sort of made us not sure that, would that be a good thing? It seems like an awful thing to have to think about, but in terms of feeding and stability and education and even the basic concerns about the environment. And it was only when we found out that this health work actually worked in favor of having families choose voluntarily, have less children, that's when we decided to get involved. And that's when we learned about vaccines and the miracle of vaccines. And it was a few years after that that the health community came together and created some of these new organizations that we're celebrating tonight. Of course, there are 3 innovative organizations that are responsible for the fact that in the last decade, that decline in childhood deaths, or if you looked at adult deaths, you would see a very similar picture because, of course, AIDS and tuberculosis mostly kill people in their later years. Malaria is definitely a huge part of that childhood death chart, both the remaining burden and the progress that we've made. So 3 new organizations were created, and they were done in a very different way. The idea was to be very lean, very fast-moving, and very adapted to the particular challenges that they were assigned. In each case, they were very, very big challenges. And so let me touch on each of these and why I'm such a believer in each of these organizations. In the case of Gavi, it's about that simple idea that every child in the world should have access to these vaccinations. We were stunned to find out that for a diarrheal disease called rotavirus that was killing over 500,000 children a year, that there was a vaccine. But strangely, that vaccine was being used for the kids in the well-off countries, even though those kids, if they got rotavirus, they weren't at much risk of a serious health problem. It was inconvenient, it wasn't a good thing, but it wasn't like the kids in the poor countries that really were at risk on over 500,000 a year dying. And so the issue of access was very poignant there. Why was it available to one group and not to the other group? All lives have equal value. And so this idea of getting rotavirus vaccine, among others, out to every child of the world sort of became a defining goal of our foundation's work. Now, we realized we couldn't do it alone, and so as we got to know the global health community, the leading countries involved, France, the UK, US, Norway, Sweden, many of the people who've been involved for many, many decades before we were and knew some of these challenges, a number of those came together and created Gavi. Gavi's done phenomenal work and still amazing work that's going on here. And so I think both France and our foundation are very proud to be huge partners of Gavi and pursue this idea of equity in vaccines that will lead to equity in health. Next, of course, is Global Fund. Global Fund was created around the same time, and it was also based on this idea of equity, that why should people in the rich world have access to HIV medicines and people in other countries not have that access? And that was really, you'd almost say, a kind of emergency. And it was amazing how countries stepped up. The United States created its own bilateral program, which is called PEPFAR. It agreed to join into Global Fund. It became the biggest funder of Global Fund, and France became the second biggest funder of Global Fund. And of course, all this was created before the financial crisis came along. And I can remember we had these nice charts for Gavi and Global Fund, where our funding would increase every year, and eventually we'd actually meet 100% of the need. Well, that was, in retrospect, it was a bit naive to expect that because we didn't anticipate the financial crisis. We thought the European countries, they're committed to 0.7%. As they move to 0.7%, they'll see that these health interventions are the most catalytic, and so the amount of money going to these health causes is going to go up very dramatically. Well, the financial crisis made us have to work harder, made us have to make our case in a time where budget trade-offs are extremely difficult. We saw this with the recent round of the global fundraising, which was very, very successful, but it required amazing work by Global Fund and all the people who are the friends of the Global Fund. The thing that really kicked it off and gave it the positive momentum last summer that was absolutely critical was France's commitment, even in tough times, to maintain that second level, to maintain its full funding, and so those incredible results have continued. In fact, because of innovation, because drug prices are coming down, because delivery systems are getting better, Global Fund is setting very ambitious targets for all three of their diseases, and we work very closely with them. It's exciting to see how much more they're going to be able to do with somewhat extra funding, because it was a record in terms of fundraising, but also with the kind of efficiencies that they're realizing as they work with the different countries and as they work with the drug companies that provide these drugs. Now, even with these two organizations, there was still a sense that there was something missing, and that was that when we thought about these tools, the diagnostic tools, the drugs and how they were administered, there needed to be somebody who was thinking about those markets and shaping those markets. And that's why a third organization, which really France was absolutely at the center of, has been the primary funder of, has really been quite amazing in, is this Unitaid. You've heard the story of how the airline tax is a big part of where the funding comes from for this. That's been a fantastic thing. It's a little hard to describe every project in particular, but they look at all the different medicines that are being used for the diseases of the poorest, particularly malaria, HIV, and TB, and they go and think about, could that price be brought down? Or is there something like the pediatric formulation that's been missing? Some of the most stunning work is to get these pediatric medicines out. If you go to the clinics and talk to them about how they were breaking the pills up and trying to make it so that young kids could take these medicines, it was really quite horrific how people were having to deal with the fact that special work had not been done for these children's doses. So the pricing is part of the story, but also more and more, wherever possible, moving to as few pills as possible, ideally moving to a single pill a day. In the case of tuberculosis, that is achievable. In the case of AIDS, in some cases that's achievable today and over time more and more, to make it easy for people to adhere to their treatment, which is what really gives you the ultimate result of millions and millions of lives saved. There's some wonderful stuff coming along in terms of HIV diagnostics that come out of their work. There's a new TB diagnostic that actually is very fast and not only detects normal TB, it detects drug-resistant TB. And by making a big volume commitment to this, which is called Gene Expert, the work on TB has moved forward. We're bringing TB deaths down quite a bit, and so we can be even more ambitious there. Malaria drugs, making sure the very best drugs aren't so expensive that people are buying the older drugs, which unfortunately, chloroquine in particular, now there's huge drug resistance, and so finally people are moving to the so-called artemisinin drugs that really work incredibly well. Because of all the financial constraints we're under, this word innovative finance, you hear it all the time. What does it mean? Well, it means any way that we can raise money for these causes is very, very worthwhile. One thing we'd love to see, and again, France is in the lead on this, is taking the financial tax and moving it from just being a France-level activity to having, it looks like, somewhere between 11 and 13 European countries participate. There will be the issue, if that goes into effect, of is that money in particular dedicated to the causes of those most in need. So it's a two-stage process. Getting that tax in place would be a step forward, and then perhaps even on a country-by-country basis, we'll have to go in and look at whether each of those governments feels this is the right thing to do. And telling the story of how this money is used is what gives me hope that we have a real prospect there for success. France has taken 15% of the domestic tax and used that, and in some cases, people are talking about even higher percentages that might go to these particular needs. Now, innovative finance, one thing that to be clear on is that it's meant to be in addition to the incredible generosity that comes out of the general budget. And this is another area where Europe in general has been absolutely fantastic. In fact, about 60% of the so-called development assistance comes from European countries. So even in the face of a financial crisis, a lot of tough challenge, every budget being looked over in a big way, we're still seeing great generosity. This slide shows it as a percentage. And of course, there's two ways you can look at it. You can look at the absolute aid numbers, which would show the U.S. because of the size of its economy, the biggest at about 30 billion. Or you can look at a percentage where the U.S. on this chart, it's up there, but you probably can't read it. It's down at the 0.2% level, whereas the European average is about 0.45%. The really fantastic countries, sort of the aspirational level that many countries, including France, are committed to get to over time, is 0.7%. So we see, Germany and France today at about, 0.45%, which it's fantastic that's being maintained. And as the economy turns around, hopefully we'll move up towards those other numbers. You can see some really amazing countries. I was in Sweden on Monday. They're at over 1% and very committed to maintain that. Norway, Luxembourg, also at that very high level. Denmark at a high level. And so it's an incredible story. And it's a story where the more generous people are, the more it encourages others to do the same. And so I do believe that we can move this up. Philanthropy is also on the increase. It's not, the size of the dollars are not nearly what the government money is. We'll always need the government money, but we're seeing more people of wealth think about philanthropy. I'm certainly doing everything I can to share how much fun it is and the new things you get to learn, the new people you get to meet, the new places you get to go. This is the best job I can imagine having, and certainly I get a lot of fun doing the job. I get to do it in partnership with my wife, and that's a particularly special thing. So where does it all take us? Well, I think we can go back to this idea that lives have equal value, that we should strive to have health equity. And we want to do that by taking every country in the world and bringing them up to the level that we take for granted, and in the United States and France and all of the developed countries. And so we asked a group of experts to take a look at this and say, okay, with generosity, with some assumptions about new innovations coming along, for example, a malaria vaccine, which we now have a first generation of that, and over the next decade, I think we'll certainly have a second generation as well. What we can see is there is an opportunity by 2035 to reach this idea of convergence, to get to the point where it's only a few percent of children die before the age of 5. And if you go back all the way, hundreds of years ago, we had equity hundreds of years ago. Every country in the world, over 30% of the children died before the age of 5. That wasn't a very nice form of equity, but so we will have gone through a period of inequity, where the rich countries moved to be less than 2%. And then with the right solidarity, that's a word that's used more here in France, but it's a great word, we will move everyone to get below that 2% figure. And so I'm a very numbers-oriented person. This is real. This is what we can make happen. Thank you for everything you do to make this a reality. I know Unitaid is very committed to do their part in achieving a world that has health equity for every child and every adult. Thank you.